And we're live. Okay, welcome back. So in this video, the what we're going to look at is a screen here to log hours. Now the challenge with this screen today is that when a user goes to log their hours, they actually don't get any feedback that they did something in the system. So for example, let's take November 20th here. If I click log hours, oh, date working up in the future. Good for this system. Okay, so let's pick the 16th. Okay, hit log hours. Well, I can see that should have been updated and it didn't, so we'll fix that. But it also doesn't give the user any feedback that it was successful. And it doesn't really show the user how many hours they've logged or any kind of historical information. Now, me personally, I love graphs. I think graphs are fantastic and a great visual way to display things. If we want to encourage our volunteers to work more hours, maybe we show them, over time how many hours they've worked, and hopefully that's a motivational thing for them. So let's just go into our database for a second to confirm that indeed we did log those hours. We just can't see it. So it's going to take a second for Workbench to pop open here. There we go. Okay, so I'll use our volunteer database, and if we look at our hours worked table, we scroll down. Right down here, we can see volunteer 3 worked 8 hours on November 16th. So it's recorded, but the user experience didn't really see it. In fact, we need to update the this day worked feature. Or this error message. That's an easy one to fix. So if we go into our controller, when we have the save button pushed right here, if this was successful logging hours, we can clear the message. So we can say message label. Let's set the text. Hours logged. Now at least it'll show that the hours were logged, but it's still not a very visual way of dealing with it. Let's add a graph and make it just that little bit better. So the way we're going to add a graph is if we go into Scene Builder, we're going to add a graph, a line graph, over to the right of this information. And the way that we can do that is right now, if we look at the way we've structured this, we have a vertical box, and then everything's inside the vertical box. So we have a label, a grid pane, and then another label here, and these horizontal box to handle the buttons. So really what we need to do is we want the grid pane, and beside the grid, we want to add in a chart. So the easiest way to do that is actually use a horizontal box there as well. So let's go down, horizontal box. I'm going to add it to our vertical box right about here and drag the grid pane into it. Now it kind of squishes it because the horizontal box itself is really narrow. So let's just stretch that out. I'm just holding down the left mouse button to do that. Now, if I want to add a chart, for example, a line chart, I can just drag it into my horizontal box, and boom, it sets it up for us just like that. So the next thing we need to do is we need to start defining and giving some names for components in our line chart. So I'm going to go to the code section, and under FXID, I'm going to say, well, this is called the line chart. And if I expand this, I can see we have a category axis, which will be the month axis. And we have another one called the number axis, which here will be the hours axis. Okay, so now we've got all of our charts built out here. We can do save. And to save some time, we can go to view and sample the skeleton. And this gives us all of our imports, and it also gives us all of our things that we need to add for our instance variables. So let's go over here. I'm going back into our log hours view controller. I'll scroll up, and we'll say objects used in the line chart. Let's paste them right in. Save. Now, if you remember from the earlier video where we did the bar chart, there's one other thing that we need to add in here, which is something called an XY chart series. And that keeps track of the relationship. So for each month, we're going to have so many hours worked. So this series is where we'll populate that information. So let's take a look at when we are building out our scene. There's the first thing that will happen is it'll load a method called initialize. Okay. Now at this point in time, when it calls the initialize method, it doesn't actually have the volunteer information loaded. So we can't populate our chart at this time. If we did, we're going to end up with a lot of null pointer exceptions. But if you remember, we made the special method called preload data. And preload data allows us to pass in a volunteer to the scene, and it configures this instance variable called volunteer. So what we can do is we can actually now use that to update our line chart. So what I'll do is in here, I'll just create a simple method called update line chart. Now I'm not going to put all the code right in here because the thing is, every time the user updates the hours logged, we want to update the line chart. So I don't want to reload. I don't want to run this method because the goal of this method is to actually just load the volunteer information and update the screen. So I'm going to create a new method, and the goal of this method is to update the line chart with the latest information stored in the database. So to do that, we're going to initialize the instance variables. So we have, what did we call things? Hours worked. There we go. So the hours logged series, right? That's our XY series. This equals new XY chart series. And actually, look up here. Add that in. Okay. So we have our XY chart, and then we can give it a name. So by default, it creates a little legend, and it's going to label this series. And if we don't give it a name, it just puts like a little kind of red circle there. It doesn't give it much context. So we're going to say set the name. And what I want this data to represent is the current year. So what this set name method is expecting is a string, right? So if it's 2017, we want to say 2017, but next year, we want it to say 2018. What we need to do is dynamically, excuse me, figure this out. So if we use the local date.now, get the year, this method will dynamically return an integer. Now the problem is that it's going to say you can't convert an integer into a string. So what we're going to do is use our wrapper class to do that. So we're going to say integer string, and then we'll get our date, our year from there. And then each time we call this method, we actually want to clear the data out of it and load it fresh each time. So what I'm going to say is every time we call this line chart, you can get the data. What gets returned is an observable list, and we'll just clear it. Clear the data out of there each time we load it. Since doing a database query is a fair bit of work, I'm going to create a simple little method to do that. Populate series from database. And that could generate an error, so we'll catch a SQL exception, call it E. And we'll just print it to the screen. Whoops, what happened there? This method will populate the hours logged series, excuse me again, with the latest info database. And you could put this all in one big method. I just felt like it was a little easier to read breaking it out. Public void. So when we're creating a database query, we have the same usual things that we need to do. So we're going to have to set up our connection. We're going to have to set up a prepared statement, and we're going to have to build a result set. So say connection. Actually set it to be null, and we'll make a prepared statement. And we need a result set. Okay, and once you've done your imports, then you can try to do the query. And it's going to catch the SQL exception. So step one, connect to the database. The way we're going to do that, we'll say connection is equal to driver manager. We'll have to do an import here, get the connection. And what we're going to pass in is where to look for this. So it's JDBC, so Java Database Connector. And we're going to look for the MySQL code on localhost, which is my computer, port 3306. And the database we're looking for is called volunteer. And then we're going to add in the use SSL equals false. That's because I'm doing this on my local. And my username and password is a very robust student and student. Okay. If I don't put this in, it'll still work, but it puts a little error in the output screen. So we just want to keep that nice and clean. Step two, create a string with the SQL statement. Let's look at that. So rather than trying to get this working here in Java, it's a lot easier. Excuse me. If you go over to Workbench. Now in Workbench, this is basically what we want as an output. We want to be able to see for a particular volunteer, given a month, how many hours they worked, right? So let's just zoom in a bit. So let's start building that out. So we can figure out the month that they worked. We can say select month name, the column date worked. Okay. And we can sum up the hours worked. From the table hours worked. And we want this for a specific volunteer, right? So we're going to say where the volunteer ID. So I'm going to pick volunteer volunteer ID number 3. So where volunteer ID equals 3. Okay, and then we can say we also want it for a specific year, because I don't want to see you know, all the hours that are worked in November overall time. I just want to see this year's data. So I'll say, and the year they worked equal to, because this video is being made in 2017, I'll say 2017. And I want it to be grouped by the month. So I'll say month, date worked. Now, it's just sort of a neat little trick here. See, month name returns the actual name of the month, like January, February, March, April. When you use group by, it will sort it to the best of its ability. So if you do month name, it's going to put April first, because alphabetically that's the earliest month. But if you use month instead of month name, what it does is it returns the numeric version of the month. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this gives us information in the order of January, February, March, April. So if I highlight these and I run that query, what I see is here's all of the months where that person recorded and the sum, the amount of hours they worked in each of those months. Now, volunteer number 1, he's worked a lot more hours. So if I populate that, you can see there's something for every month. So this is basically what we want to run in Java. So I'm going to copy this and go over here, and I'm going to say string SQL equals. Okay, so this is what I want my SQL statement to be. And if I highlight each of these, hold down Shift and hit Tab, sorry, release Shift and hit Tab, then I can move everything all together. And what I have to do is I have to take out these new line items, because that will cause a little problem. And you see I'm adding a space in here. If you don't add the space in here, it'll actually bring this where when it evaluates it and puts it right here, which will cause an error. So getting rid of the new lines and adding in some spaces. There's our SQL statement. Now the problem is we can't hard code it for user number 1. What we actually need to do is we don't know which volunteer ID we want, so we're going to put a question mark there. And similarly, although this works in 2017, we also want it to work in 2018. So I'm going to put a question mark here. So now we have a proper statement, and what we need to do is we're going to create it in the system now. So we're going to say 3 create statement. So we're going to say statement equals, and we use our connection to prepare the statement. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we need to bind the variable. So every time we see a question mark, we need to bind that with an actual value. The parameters. So first one here is our volunteer ID. So we're going to say statement. It's an integer that we want. The first integer that we're going to replace is going to be our volunteer in the system. And lucky enough, volunteers know their own ID. So you just say get the volunteer ID. And then the next thing we want to set is the year. So to do that, I can use my local date.now, get the year. Okay. Now we've set the volunteer ID. We've set the year that we're looking for. And the first thing we can do is we execute the query. So our result set is going to be equal to statement.execute query. That actually now sends it to the database and is going to return something that we're storing in our result set. And we're going to loop over the result set and build the series. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to say while result set next. So as long as there's something else in here, keep doing this. And remember, a series is basically a combination. In this case, it's going to be a month with the amount of hours worked in that month, right? So we have to put in 2 data points. So we called it the hours logged series. So what we're going to do with our hours log series is we get the existing data that's already in there, which is an observable list, and then we're going to add to it. And what we're going to add is a new XY point. So we're going to say new XY chart dot data. In here, we need to put in two things. So the first thing is going to be, the month name, and then the second thing is going to be the hours worked. So to get the month name, we'll say result set at the string, because that's the name of the month. It was in position 1. Okay, so if we go back to here, this is column number 1. This is column number 2. So it's going to first get this and then that. And then the next time through loop, we're going to get the month name of February and the hours worked at 24. The next time through loop, we're going to get March and then 40. So to get the hours worked, we're going to say result set, and it's an integer this time, and the column index is 2. So this will now populate our series. And if there's any problems along the way, we'll catch that. I'm just going to print it to the screen for now. If we did trigger an exception, then we wouldn't have properly closed off all of our connections. So what we're going to do is we'll do a finally block here. And we're going to say if the connection is not equal to null, so if it's still actually pointing something, then we're going to say connection.close. And if the statement that's not equal to null, then statement should be closed. And same thing for a result set. If it's not empty, then result set close. And then we're going to say this throws a SQL injection, or sorry, a SQL exception. Save. Great. So now if we look at this, when we load our screen, we're going to update the line chart. And when we update the line chart, we're basically going to create a whole new series here. And then we populate that series from the database. And the last thing we need to do is we need to actually add this line chart. We need to add this series to our line chart. So what we do is we say line chart, and then we're going to get the existing data that's in there. And then we're going to add all of these data points in our, we called it hours logged series. Why is this unhappy? Hang on here. Maybe it's how I defined my series at the very beginning. Just call it XY series. That seems to have cleaned it up. Okay. And then lastly, whenever the user pushes our save or log button, we updated things. And we updated our little error message label, but what we did not do is we need to still update our line chart. So now I can just call our update method. So update, there we go. So we can say update the line chart. So every time we push save button, if nothing blew up, then update the line chart. Hit save. Let's give this a try. So we're going to log in. Now, when we log in, it looks a lot more interesting, right? Like we have our data series here, and let's go. Let's do something in June. Maybe we forgot to record some hours in June on the 7th. So let's log 8 hours. So I hit log hours. It redraws our chart. Actually makes See how it adjusted the months to be vertically aligned now? We have hours along here, and the person can see real-time updates. And if they log some more hours, right, it gives a nice little animation. So our users are happy. So there you go. There's updating our line chart. Now, as for our, looks like we've got that working well as well. And if we try to pick a date in the future, let's see what happens. Log some hours. Can't do that. Log some hours now, and it works. Okay, there you have it. We've got our line graph working. See you in the next video.